Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TMRP, the Metropolis Radio Podcast. And today, I want to make a response to some things that Crazy Joe of MegaPodTastic and Dave from CinemaSickness were saying on the most recent Crazy After Dark. And if you're watching this sometime in the future, that was the Crazy After Dark dated April 13th of 2021. I will leave a link to that live stream in the description on whatever platform that you are currently watching this on. But getting back to it, they were talking about the idea of the original artists reclaiming their copyrights 35 years after the initial sale or license agreement with these major companies. Now, they said some things on there that I would like to debunk and explain a little better. And I understand the pressure of being live and not fully understanding a topic, but you attempt to talk about it anyway. And I want to say this before I really get into this. And I just want to make it clear that I don't dislike either party in this response. In fact, Joe and I have collaborated quite a few times up to this point. He's been on my channel a couple of times, I think 3 times in fact. We did a ranking of the MCU together back in, I think it was April of 2020. And then we most recently did a live stream together talking about Grindhouse. And he joined me for my Star Trek Lower Decks review, and I've been on his podcast once before. And please understand that I don't have any malintent when making my rebuttal. In fact, the worst thing that you two did, both MegaPodTastic and CinemaSickness, the worst thing that you two are guilty of is not fully understanding the subject, and as a result, making a couple of bad comparisons. That's really it. I'm gonna show the clips in context here for all to see. And then we will go to a screen grab where I will make my rebuttals.
Here's Lisa with the info. The Phillies paid $215,000 to creators Bonnie Erickson and Wade Harrison and their design firm Harrison Erickson in 1984 for the rights to use the Philly Fanatic as the team mascot forever. Fanatic is worth
forever.
The Fanatic is worth much more now. A section of the Copyright Act allows creators of copyrighted works to renegotiate or terminate a licensing agreement 35 years after the initial agreement date. See, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, if you put it in writing that you own this thing now, you shouldn't. I don't think you should, just because your thing's worth more. Like let's say I sold you a Blu-ray. Let's say I'm like, hey, here's this Monkeys Blu-ray for $200, and now suddenly it's going for $500 on eBay, and I go back to you and go, yeah, you owe me a couple hundred more because we got to renegotiate the terms of that. Like, it just doesn't seem right.
No, I agree.
I'm all for creators. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for creators, but like, it just.
But once you sell your work off, I mean, then that's on you.
I don't know. That's probably not the popular opinion, and. Maybe we should have Dave Perillo here to chime in. He's an artist, maybe he'd be like, well, guys, you're both wrong.
I mean, like, yeah, once you sell your artwork off or whatever, your creation off, you've sold it. Like, that's, I mean, okay, now it's worth $1 bajillion. Well, maybe you should have sold it.
Gary says, to Lisa's point, that's how James Cameron got the rights to the Terminator franchise back in 2019. Yeah, and again, I don't know that James Cameron should have gotten the rights back. Like, if you sold it, you sold it. Yeah. So it looks like they paid for the rights to use the Fanatic, but not buying the character itself. Still kind of sketchy. And Gary says it's a bad example to make, Joe. I agree with that section of the Copyright Act. That way, big companies can't buy your stuff for pennies to make billions. Look what happened to Forrest Gump. Yeah, but ultimately you got to make a decision, right?
Yeah, they buy something for pennies. That's your fault.
I mean, like, nobody's putting a
here's this. I'm going to sell you my Deer Park company for $1. Well, that was your stupidity. Why'd you do that?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some ins and outs to it we're not seeing, but I don't know. Yeah. I'm kind of like, well, you sold the thing. You sold it. Jesse.
So I want to start this by looking at this article from Reuters, and this is what Crazy Joe was referring to here, is that the Phillies are suing to keep the Philly Fanatic. For those that don't know, and the article does go into it. I think it goes into it here. One of the most recognizable. Blah blah blah. They're trying to stop the mascot's careers from taking away the baseball's team bright green fat free long beak creature. So here we go. Here's where it goes into it. The Fanatic made its debut in April 1978, and the team said it has spent millions of dollars to promote him as he became, quote, wildly popular and, quote, beloved, he did, while obtaining several trademarks. But the Phillies said the defendants, who are from Brooklyn, have threatened to end its use next June, making the Fanatic a quote-unquote free agent, and sue for copyright infringement unless the team renegotiated the 1984 agreement and paid millions of dollars. The Phillies said the original payout was $215,000. Harrison Erickson, who are the creators of the Philly Fanatic, quote, does not have the right to deprive the Phillies fans of the Fanatic or liquidate the team's, quote, huge 41-year investment in him, the complaint said. Lawyers for the defense did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The Phillies declined to comment. Of course, they never comment on ongoing litigation because neither side wants to nuke their own case. And then obviously Bonnie Erickson is also known for her work with the late Jim Henson, from whom she created, characters like Miss Piggy and the cranky balcony hecklers, Statler and Waldorf. I can never remember their names is the funny part, but I always remember them as being the peanut gallery. But yes, this lawsuit seeks to preserve the 1984 agreement, block Harrison Erickson or anyone else, including other sports teams, from using the Fanatic or selling Fanatic-related products, and collect unspecified damages. So, what are they trying to go for here? Well, I have to now go to this article that is talking about the ongoing Friday the 13th lawsuit between Sean S. Cunningham and Victor Miller, the writer of the original Friday the 13th. And this point, and this point right here, before I really read into any of this, right here, because this comes from the actual copyright. This actually comes from the actual copyright law. Okay, we're going to read this word for word. Termination of the grant may be effected at any time during a period of 5 years, beginning at the end of 35 years from the date of execution of the grant, or if the grant covers the right of publication of the work, the period begins at the end of 35 years from the date of publication of the work under the grant, or at the end of 40 years from the date of execution of the grant, whichever term ends earlier. And this is the big part here, and this is something I genuinely did not know. They only have 5 years to, the original authors, original creators, only have 5 years to genuinely go for their copyrighted material. So what, like the headline says here, what's the story with Friday the 13th ownership? Sometime before the 1980 release, Paramount Pictures got their hands on the rights to Friday the 13th. We do know that. Releasing horror movies in rapid succession. I think they released one every year up until 1988. Until eventually selling the property to New Line Cinema. The rights are now in the hands of the original film producer and director, Horror Inc., Sean S. Cunningham. Victor Miller, the writer of the original screenplay, has evoked a 1976 slice of copyright law to get the rights of his script back, and that's exactly what this is from. According to U.S. copyright law, 35 years after the copyright is sold, one has the option to terminate the sale and have the copyright revert back to them. The United States Copyright Act of 1976, Section 17, USC, subsection 203 provides that. We already read that. And this is where it gets into the real meat and potatoes here. More simply, an author who sells the copyright to their work can formally request a reversion of those rights to get their copyright back after 35 years have lapsed. But like we said, but like I just pointed out, they only have 5 years to go for it. And the logic behind that makes a lot of sense. Given that, well, if you gave enough of, well, the idea is if you give enough of a shit about it, you're gonna remember to file to get the copyright back. If you don't give a shit about it, well, then you don't give a shit about it. You let it go. Because it either A, wasn't popular, or B, it could be as simple as you moved on and you just don't give a fuck anymore. But getting back to this, this rule was added in 1976 by Congress with the intention to protect creators from unequal bargaining power. Now, remember that. Unequal bargaining power. They wanted to add the termination clause due to, quote, the unequal bargaining position of authors resulting in part from the impossibility of determining work's value until value has been exploited. Now, Dave was making the comments during the live stream where it's like, well, it's your fault for selling the damn thing. so no, you shouldn't get the rights back. And this is the point I'm trying to make. Who has ever heard of the Black Swan theory? Right? The supposed Black Swan event. If you don't know, we're gonna go into it here. So what is a Black Swan event, this asks? A Black Swan is an unpredictable event that is beyond what is normally expected of a situation and has potentially severe consequences. Black Swan events are characterized by their extreme rarity, their extreme impact, and the widespread insistence they were obvious in hindsight. Writes Nassim Nicholas Taleb, a former Wall Street trader, in his book The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. There are no limitations in the way a Black Swan event can manifest itself. It could be anything from a natural disaster to a war, a financial crash, or the outbreak of a virus. But they do share three characteristics, according to Taleb, who formulated the theory about how extreme and surprise events can play an outsized role in life. The first is that Black Swan events are outliers, something that lies outside the realm of normal expectations because nothing in the past can credibly suggest it will happen. Remember this, because I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. The second is that the event has a severe and extreme impact on society or the world. The third is that a Black Swan event is predictable after the event has occurred. Notice this. The Black Swan event is predictable after the event has occurred. While the event is not expected beforehand, it becomes explainable in hindsight, and the world asks why we weren't prepared. So let's tie this theory back into the creative profession, right? This is more talking about how the, COVID pandemic hit, but this is a very real theory going back years and years and years. Is this Black Swan theory? Who remembers a little book? It actually wasn't a book. It was a comic. It was a comic miniseries called The Books of Magic. It was written by Neil Gaiman back in 1990. Let's go into here, and I know the headline already gives it away. Harry Potter's Forgotten Predecessor. So let's go into this. An unassuming English kid with glasses obtains a pet owl and takes up his preordained destiny to enter a secret world of magic hidden in plain sight. Brought to you by one of the world's most successful fantasy authors. That thumbnail summary, of course, describes Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling's hit series, first published in 1997, which is still a massive pop culture phenomenon today. Yes, it still is. But the description also fits The Books of Magic, a DC Comics miniseries published 25 years ago this month by Neil Gaiman. Though largely forgotten, the series foretold much of pop culture's current and seemingly insatiable appetite for the superhero and fantasy genres. This article was written back in March 11th, 2015, so The Books of Magic came out in 1990, 7 years before Harry Potter. Many people point to this as The Books of Magic was Harry Potter before Harry Potter. Now, why did Harry Potter take off and become a massive pop culture success while The Books of Magic, while being the same thing, published 7 years prior? How come this didn't have the same success as that? If you were to ask me honestly, I'll tell you, I don't know. If you ask J.K. Rowling, why did Harry Potter take off while The Books of Magic, published 7 years earlier, didn't, even she is intellectually honest enough to tell you, I don't know. And even Neil Gaiman will even throw his hands up and go, hey, beats me, chap, kind of thing. I can't do a British accent. The problem is if I try to do a British accent, I sound Australian. So I'm not even going to attempt it. But still, this is something that the success of Harry Potter can only be described as a black swan and nothing more. No one could predict that Harry Potter would resonate with so many people at that particular time, despite the fact that the Books of Magic beat Harry Potter to market by 7 years. It didn't matter because everyone still talks about Harry Potter, and only the weirdos like myself even remember that the Books of Magic even existed. So how does all of this tie back into what I was saying prior? Again, it's a black swan. Again, let's go right back. The first is that black swan events are outliers, something that lies outside the realm of normal expectations, because nothing in the past can credibly suggest it will happen. blah, blah, blah. The third is that a Black Swan event is predictable after the event has occurred. So let's go back into, this revision here. Okay, back, talking about the Copyright Act of 1976. This rule was out in 1976 by Congress with the intention to protect creators from unequal bargaining power. They wanted to add the termination clause due to, quote, the unequal bargaining position of authors resulting in part from the impossibility of determining work's value until value has been exploited. This is my problem with Dave's argument. When he's throwing his hands up and saying, well, creators, it's your fault that you sold your creation for next to nothing, and now it's a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Dave, they legitimately added this part to the Copyright Act because, as we pointed out, a Black Swan is only predictable after the event has occurred. It's only predictable with the benefit of hindsight. It's not predictable when you can't just go to a company and it's like, well, I'm sitting on a multi-billion-dollar franchise right now. That company is going to say, how do we know that? Because chances are very, very high that it will not resonate with people, that it will be an abject failure, and, maybe it's not the right place or the right time. Maybe that's the secret to Harry Potter. Maybe Harry Potter benefited from right place, right time. We don't 100% know that. And another perfect example of a Black Swan event that I don't have up on screen is the original Star Wars movie. Star Wars, when it came out in 1977, was the Black Swan. Nobody could predict its success, not even 20th Century Fox, and yeah, they've been kicking themselves in the shorts ever since then for giving George Lucas the merchandising rights to it. But it goes back to the Black Swan. Nobody could predict it. So don't make this argument of, well, it's your fault that you couldn't predict that you were sitting on a Black Swan. Because nobody knows that they're sitting on a Black Swan until long after the fact. Then they realize it for what it is. And here's a perfect example that I'm going to bring up before I'm going to end this off. Is the Chucky movie rights. Why there's 2 Child's Play franchises. Okay, hear me out. This goes back obviously to 2019 when the reboot originally came out. 2019, Chucky would be the start of both a Child's Play movie reboot and a network television series, but unfortunately, the character is being torn in different directions by 2 different studios. A complicated production and distribution history leaves a lot of confusion over who truly owns the rights to Chucky. Oh, excuse me. And what kind of authority it gives them over the character. 1988, MGM released the original Child's Play. Blah, blah, blah. The film was based on a story by Don Mancini, who produced by his longtime collaborator David Kirshner. In the lead role, Brand Dourif, blah, blah, blah. But let's scroll all the way down, right here. MGM owns the original Child's Play movie rights. 5 months after Mancini unveiled the news about a Chucky TV series, fans received some troubling news. MGM would be rebooting the original Child's Play film, and without the main creative team, Mancini and Kirshner. Of course, Universal obviously wouldn't be producing either, plus Chucky himself, Dourif, wouldn't be involved. How could this happen? Because MGM owns the rights to the original Child's Play movie rights, so they're allowed to make their own version with their own team. What this means for potential Child's Play sequels isn't clear. MGM doesn't own the rights to the existing sequels, but it's possible they'll be able to make sequels to this new reboot should it prove to be a hit. If that's the case, it could mean a complicated situation where 2 separate Chucky continuities are playing out simultaneously on the big and small screen. Meaning, if that provision in the copyright law, so Child's Play came out in 1988, meaning that Don Mancini in 2023 could go and get the rights back to the first Child's Play movie. If this provision right here was not added into the Copyright Act of 1976, what we would be dealing with is 2 competing franchises, and I think this is why MGM has failed to make a sequel to the 2019 reboot, is because Don Mancini, all he has to do is play the waiting game to get the rights back to the first movie. So why is this provision important? Look at what could have potentially happened here. You could have had 2 competing franchises, two competing continuities. Potentially, Don Mancini could have been competing against his own creation. That's what the ultimate problem is. You know, how are you supposed to know that Chucky was going to take off in the late 1980s? You don't know that until long after it's over. And that was the point I really wanted to make. And, you know, they were, and both Joe and Dave were making some bad comparisons about, you know, I think Joe made a comparison about selling like a Monkeys Blu-ray and then going back because it shot up in value. Again, the only thing that those two are really guilty of is just making bad comparisons. And Joe, I 100% agree with you on your opinion that James Cameron should not have gotten the rights to the Terminator back. I think Terminator Dark Fate forever destroyed that particular franchise. James Cameron stepping away and letting other people run the ship honestly saved the Terminator. But guys, with that, I think I've made all the points that, you know, I could make on this. I don't want to drag this out for too long. Again, I don't have any malintent toward either Joe or Dave. Joe, I've collaborated with quite a few times. Dave, I've maybe had a couple email exchanges with them at the most, and that's about it. But still, again, the only thing that they're guilty of is just making a couple bad comparisons, and those bad comparisons inspired me to do this response. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Thanks so much for watching, and if you stuck around this long, you know, thanks so much for sticking around this long. As you guys know, I am always terrible at ending these, so I will see you guys next time.